You're going to dive into the four-step process that we use to evaluate and help kids that are struggling with ADHD. So, guys, I'm going to go through and talk to you very specifically about the process that we use. We're going to go into some depth. I'll bring up a couple of slides here so you can look at these. And then also even give you some samples of some of the things that we use for our evaluation process. We have a lot of people who ask, how do we help kids with ADHD? How do we even evaluate a kid with ADHD? We have some very specific tests that we do here in our practice that give us an ability to go and see things that other providers cannot. So what I want to do is I want to pull up my slideshow and I'm going to talk in depth about the different things that I think will be super helpful for you as a parent to be able to know what can be done to evaluate a child in our office to help them to overcome their ADHD symptoms. So let's take a look here. So let's take a look here at this first page. Now, guys, the basic things here that we're always going to do are going to be starting number one, first and foremost, with diving into the history. And I think this is super important to understand this because when you look at things like evaluating history, everything starts there. The thing that is oftentimes deeply, deeply overlooked is the starting points for stress, where they begin in the nervous system. We have to look at things like what was the birth process like, where what was the child's the labor and delivery, what was mom's pregnancy like, was mom under a lot of stress during the pregnancy? Because one of the things that is clearly known is that the amount of stress that mom is under has a direct effect to the later likelihood of development of neurodevelopmental challenges. Numerous research studies now confirm this. We've seen this many, many, many times here clinically. So there's lots of data points behind this that reinforce this. We want to understand things like, what was the child like as a newborn? What were they like as an infant? What were they like as a toddler and as a young child? And these things all matter because what you're looking for are signs of this, what we call a perfect storm brewing within this child. As a newborn, were they able to latch? Were they colicky? Were they able to poop? Because these are all critical functions that every newborn should be able to do successfully. Were they able to sleep? What was their immune system like? Were they a fussy baby? Were they colicky? All these things that become really critical. So as you're going from those newborn infant stages, we're evaluating these things because these tell us there are risk factors. When they become a toddler, oftentimes what you'll see is there's going to be an evolution. Things may get better on the front side with some of the other symptoms from when they were babies, but as a toddler now, they may be showing signs they're stimming a lot. They may be showing needs for lots of proprioceptive input, which is they may be that super high energy child, or conversely, they may be a super low tone child. In either case, these are patterns that are starting to emerge. You might start seeing things that are demonstrating issues with emotional regulation and temperament. You might be seeing sensory signs and behaviors. All these things that are continuing to evolve as their nervous system is maturing, but also we're seeing more and more warning signs that the perfect storm is starting to take hold in the nervous system and starting to wire into the child's nervous system and starting to affect their quality of life. So as we go through this process, it's starting to develop for us a clinical picture of what's happening, depth of the stress, and we're starting to get clinical ideas about what we're going to need to do to help the child, to get this child's nervous system out of this path and onto a better place. The second thing that we need to do is we need to get insight neuroscans. And the insight neuroscans are really critical for us. And I can tell you, as a parent who went down this road myself to help my own daughter, this was the single best thing that we ever did. It gave us a completely different way to evaluate what was happening with our daughter's nervous system because it allows us to see patterns that you can't detect otherwise. And what I mean by that is that we use 3 different tests. Let me skip to the next slide here so you can see this. So in this graph here is one that is called an electromyograph, surface electromyograph. The pattern on the left, on the very top with all of the bright red big bars, is classic for what we call a drunken raging bull pattern. This pattern is very typical for kids who have issues with lots of sensory seeking behaviors, oftentimes lots of emotional regulation issues, oftentimes very high energy, but have a difficult time with focusing and organizing sensory input because the nervous system is getting way too much and it's really, really disorganized, and the brain can't slow it down and organize and coordinate these things. The second scan is a month later, the way that this child's nervous system changed. And it was a big drop off in energy, but a much better organizational pattern. These are the kind of things that in a month's worth of care are not uncommon to see. When you remove the background interference, clear out those patterns that we see by using chiropractic adjustments, and these are the kind of things that you can see change in a month. Subjectively, this is better organization of thought. This is better sensory processing. This is a calmer central nervous system, and so many other things that go with it. We use a 3-test suite. The one on the left is a different image of what you saw in the first picture. That's a surface EMG. The one on the right is what's called a thermal scan. A thermal scan measures what is coming from the brain downhill into the spinal cord. And this is a really important scan because if you think about this in terms of what it's reading, it takes all of these different measurements from the spinal cord and it puts them into a database that compares them in a few different ways. Number one, the scans will compare from left to right. Is there differences in output and temperature from one side of the spinal cord to the next? There's another graph that it creates that tells us, are the temperature outputs at each spinal level normal for what we would expect to see at that area of the spinal cord? And this is good because this gives us patterns so that we can see, are we getting normal brain output? Are we getting normal temperature regulation from one spinal cord level to another? If they're not, they're telling us signs of what is called dysautonomia, dysregulation in the autonomic nervous system, which is a key component to nearly every neurodevelopmental challenge. If you look at the science, the data, the literature that's out there, they all talk about issues with dysautonomia and dysregulation. The other test that we use that allows us to go several layers deeper into the depth of stress is what is called a heart rate variability scan, which is where we can measure specifically a nerve called the vagus nerve and a system called the parasympathetics, which is considered to be rest, digest, growth, development, healing, but it's also cognitive function, social, emotional, sensory processing, and so on and so forth, compared to the fight or flight system, aka known as the sympathetic system. And so if you look at the graph on the bottom, you can see there are different zones. The green zone is ideal and normal. The yellow zone is considered to be moderate or 1 standard deviation away from normal. The orange is considered to be the moderate, which is 2 standard deviations from normal, and red, which is considered to be severe. And so the further away you get, obviously, the worse the nervous system is able to regulate itself. And this becomes a big issue because if you have poor plotting on this graph, especially as a child, this can tell us there are going to be major interruptions to the normal developmental track of a child's brain. So this becomes something that we have to dive very deep into, but it's also a tracking point because when we start with the scans, what we're going to lead into next is how we're going to use these in the follow-up. And this is where it becomes critical because once you have a baseline, now that you have the baseline, then you can track this forward because then once we have that, we can care plan. What these allow us to do is to make very educated and informed care plan assessments. It tells us pretty accurately about how many adjustments we're going to need, over what period of time, how often we're going to reevaluate, and to allow us to set proper expectations for the parents of what is going to change and how things are going to change over the course of the care plan. And then what we do from there is once we set this forth of how we're going to adjust the child, what strategies we're going to use, how many things can we adjust, where are the key areas that we need to adjust. Once we know that, then we need to do is implement the care plan. And step 4 is we need to monitor. That means that we need to rescan on a regular basis to watch the patterns change and evolve. Kind of like the one that I showed you up here, where the scans in 1 month to month 2 change dramatically. This is what we do with every single one of our patients so that we can watch the changes the nervous system is making, because these changes on the scans help us to understand where the nervous system is in the process of refiring and rewiring, or what we call stabilizing. But if we see the scans are changing, the expectation is that the symptoms are going to improve because it means the brain and its function is improving. And so what we do is we watch the scans to make sure they're changing as expected. If we need to make modifications to how we are caring for the child, we can modify our adjusting technique. We can add additional things if necessary, both at home or in the office. And then what we do is we follow through until all of the goals are achieved. And this becomes the process, is we need to monitor to make sure that everything is being followed through to completion. Because ultimately, moms and dads, if you're looking for help, you're trying to help your child, you're looking for resources, the most important thing that can be done is making sure that we follow everything through to its completion. And these tools allow us to be able to track from beginning to end so we know exactly what needs to be done, where we are. Do we need to call an audible? Do we need to change our adjusting technique internally? And then we get these checkpoints together and we look at the entire clinical picture, and we're able to walk ourselves from beginning to end with certainty that we know that we can help a child and what we can lay out the steps for the moms and dads in between. So I know obviously I went through quite a bit. If you are on one of the live streams and you have questions, feel free to drop a question down here in the chat. I would be more than happy to answer those here before we get off today. If you don't want to go through on the chat and drop a question, please feel free to put it in the comments. You can DM us. I know a lot of folks have questions about this. If you have never seen this type of technology before or heard about a management process like this, happy to discuss this. We work with many families throughout the area. So we can talk with you about so many different scenarios. We work with kids with, ADHD. We work with kids with sensory issues, emotional dysregulation issues, autism, seizure disorders across the spectrum. So if this is something that has been valuable for you, obviously, I would love to go and hear your feedback. If this has helped you and you know somebody who this would help, please share this with them so we can get the message out. Because ultimately, the reason why we do any of this type of content is to help families in our community. So this is Dr. Scott Haggerty. Thank you guys so much for spending the last 11 and a half minutes with me. And let me know how else we can help. Send us comments and let us know what else we can do to serve you. Okay. God bless you guys. Have a great day.